comes quite as close to achieving that as XR does. Welcome to Spring in XR. My name is Adrian Fagarashanu. I am a mixed reality developer here at the BMS Lab. And let's go over the itinerary today. So we have a short introduction, after which we'll have a panel discussion with some wonderful experts. And then there will be a short 15-minute intermission. We will continue the panel discussion, after which we'll have lunch, and you'll be able to register for a think tank. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a think tank today. It's very exciting. And at 1 o'clock, the think tank begins. And at 1 o'clock and at 3:30, the think tank wraps up. So we'll have groups giving various pitches. And then there will be a judging process and an award ceremony. And then afterwards, of course, we have various demos throughout our facilities here. And feel free to network as well. There's also snacks and beverages, so please help yourselves. Oh.
Misschien een beetje een rare vraag, maar zou die ietsje zachter kunnen? Wij kunnen net niet volgen hier in de.
Sorry, do you speak English?
Zeg je?
Sorry, can I talk to you?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Good. Is it possible to change the noise a little bit?
Okay. Yeah, sure. A little bit we can, but we have an event.
It's a very important event, and
Yeah.
but
Okay.
it's very difficult.
Okay, we will change a little
Thank
bit.
you.
Yeah.
That's good. That's fine. Sia, is Jan Willem here?
Sometimes. Yeah.
You wanna come up? You can come up. Okay. So what is the BMS Lab? Well, I think it would be better if I introduced you to someone special, the managing director of the BMS Lab, Jan Willem van Klooster, and he is coming shortly to talk a little bit about what we do here and who we are. So just bear with us for a second. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves if you'd like.
And also, it's a Friday, there's no taking this
Just find a solution. Oh my God.
They're also the words.
What? He was feeling also tired, so like, maybe not. Yeah.
And here is Jan Willem van Klooster. Warm welcome, everyone.
This one?
Sure. Yeah.
Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming. And I think if you are interested in XR, in spring is in the XR, Lente in Twente, then hopefully you've come to the right place. Here, among others, in our 4 virtual and extended reality labs, one of the best driving simulators in the Netherlands, and you can find it back on Uitzending Gemist, for instance. Erik Scherder using XR in his squads. I think we have a very nice place here to think and brainstorm and experience together the possibilities and new frontiers that are possible in this field. So thank you all for coming. I hope you will have a very nice day together. I hope you will make a lot of encounters and think about new research and education possibilities. Expand your horizons a bit, as we've had in the last event as a title by ChatGPT generated. And I also would like you to give a warm applause to our intern who set this all up, and Lina, our VR liaison coordinator, who made this day possible. So.
And Christina. Christina as well.
And Christina as well, of course, our event coordinator. Thank you very much.
You want to give a little talk about the BMS Lab? What we do, who we are?
You want me to tell a little bit more about BMS Lab? Well, yeah, most of, not everybody, I see some familiar faces, but for those who don't know, the BMS Lab, where you are today, we have 21 lab rooms in this building and the next room. It's actually the Faculty Innovation Lab of the Faculty of Behavioral Management and Social Sciences, meaning that we try to be a catalyzer for innovative research and education in this faculty. We work, of course, with the researchers, teachers, and students in this faculty, but also the rest of the university, and we have some selected partners regionally and also internationally, mainly, for instance, Thales, Nolders, Artemis, Politecnico Milano, and some other universities, including in Canada, where Peter is today and where you are from. So in this setting, we work in a few different research lines. XR is one of the main, with 4 or 5 VR development staff and 4 VR lab rooms. And a lot of facilities to that end. If you want to make use of it, that's possible, both for external partners as well for students and researchers from this university. Look at our website, utwente.nl/BMSlab. And apart from that, you will be able to see everything today. I guess there's also a neuroscience lab, of course, a mobile lab to do, for instance, virtual reality experiments in the field. Here we have a lot of participants who are young, highly educated, but that's not always represented for the target group you may be interested in. So with the mobile lab, studies are also done, for instance, in the city center. To give an example, we recently had a study to look at how drones, surveillance drones, are being experienced by the general public, if they're used like with cameras to observe or for security reasons. Well, we can ask it here in the campus, but of course it's completely different setting when you have a drone on top of a festival terrain or a drone on top of a city center, and the experience of being surveilled is different from place to place. That's something that was tested out by really looking through the sky with virtual reality glasses and then having the drones overhead the city center, which of course is not possible yet to do in real life. Well, it is at the airport, but not downtown in the city center. So that's just one of the examples for the mobile lab. On the left top picture, you see a virtualizer. As you know, you can walk in VR by pressing a joystick button, or you need a large space like this to experience bigger environments, such as trains or train stations. It's also possible to do that on a giant mouse pad, like the virtualizer, which can also incline nowadays to give a little bit more space in a safe way to actually walk around and navigate new environments. Something that we are also combining in virtual reality, but also with eye tracking to see how people are actually looking at things is by employing eye tracker technology. This can be done, such as here by the kid who's looking at where is Waldo, so she's trying to find Wally. And that can also be done in virtual reality. For instance, the driving simulator over there, they have eye tracking in VR glasses that allow also to study how people are actually experiencing and looking at, for instance, new interface concepts, new car designs or interior car designs, new cockpits, but also helps to find out how people are actually looking at things, both in the real life, such as in the picture, but also in virtual reality. This is possible. So if you have questions about the BMS Lab, feel free, of course, to ask during the day. One of the staff available, Adrian, Lucy's there, Christina is there, Melina is there. So again, warm welcome, and I hope you will have a very nice day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's do this here. Okay. So as you can see, a lot of the things we do at the lab here has a focus on immersion, bringing people together. But I thought it'd be nice if first we went over a little bit about what XR actually is, for those of you who might not be completely familiar. So I'll just go over this fairly quickly. So XR stands for extended reality. And this is a combination of virtual reality and augmented reality. And so looking at the family tree of XR technologies, you can see that augmented reality is usually broken up into either mobile, augmented reality or AR glasses. So that's things like you can think Google Glass or things of that nature. Mobile AR, you can think of Pokemon Go, for example. That's an application that uses mobile AR. Okay, well, what is virtual reality? Well, the idea of virtual reality is that it immerses you in essentially a new stimulated digital environment. So it's a separate environment from the one that you're physically occupying currently. And of course, you do this by wearing a head-mounted display. And that is the transport tool, if you will. And so through this, we achieve a presence by engaging multiple senses. Now, here's some examples of VR headsets, but also VR capable headsets. So you can see there we have a Vario XR3. So that Vario XR3 is actually a really great headset, one of the leading enterprise headsets on the market. And it combines virtual reality and augmented reality, hence XR. Of course, you have Oculus Quest 2. This one took the world by storm very recently. One of the first proper standalone VR headsets. It gained popularity. I think this is actually one of the reasons why VR skyrocketed so much within the past few years. And then we have something like the Pimax. The Pimax is interesting. It's not as common, but they tend to have more experimental features. I think they have a headset with the largest field of view on the market. And then you have things like the original Oculus Rift, of course. We couldn't get the Quest without that. And the Valve Index by Valve, the company who makes games and Steam, if you're familiar. Okay, what is augmented reality? Well, AR is essentially an enhancement of the physical space you occupy instead of a separate reality. And so in this way, you overlay digital elements in this physical space that you occupy. And so it enhances our perception through contextual and interactive information. And it empowers users to manipulate and explore digital objects within their surroundings. Here's some examples of AR capable devices, we can say. So again, Vario XR3 also has augmented reality capabilities. Of course, I mentioned Pokemon Go. There's a large variety of apps, with architecture and furniture design, things of that nature. That's also augmented reality. And then, of course, Microsoft HoloLens 2, an enterprise augmented reality headset. Okay, and some industry applications for XR. Well, I would say XR transcends just entertainment. It goes much beyond that. There's a large variety of applications here through various sectors. And so, of course, education and training being a foundational one. Healthcare and therapy through pain management, surgical training, mental health treatment, things of that nature. Architecture and design, as I mentioned, a lot of applications with that. And of course, gaming and entertainment. Now, speaking of gaming and entertainment, I think VR, AR, and XR as a whole would not be where it is today without gaming. I think it's one of the largest impacts as far as the innovation of this technology. And of course, the idea being that you want to be immersed in a game that you play. And so you have various leading companies like Valve, which I mentioned earlier, and they've been pushing the boundaries quite a bit, actually. They recently released a title called Half-Life Alyx, which really pushed the boundaries as far as the visuals are concerned. And this also was tied to the release of one of their new headsets, the Valve Index, which pushed the bar in quite a few areas, including the controllers were somewhat innovative as far as individual finger tracking, for example. And of course, AR also transforms entertainment. There's AR experiences tied to gaming. Pokemon Go, as I mentioned, is the most popular one. And then architectural games, I suppose. Okay, education and training. XR can revolutionize this industry as well because the name of the game is engagement and interactivity. You have virtual classrooms, field trips, you can imagine. It goes on and on. Medical training as well. Of course, if you can have more interactivity in your training, then that's always a plus. And yeah. Healthcare and therapy. Of course, this plays a pivotal role. And actually, I would say that a lot of advancements in the medical field have come through playing with these XR tools as far as surgical procedures, for example. And so you could also use them for mental health well-being or exposure therapy, not just surgical procedures. So a large variety of applications for healthcare as well. Architecture, I feel like I've mentioned this quite a bit, so I'll skip over this, but essentially you can create virtual spaces when you're designing, let's say, a new building or a new interior space, what have you. Aerospace and automotive industries, this one's a little bit near and dear to my heart. Space agencies in particular uses it a lot for training. I've worked at space agencies where we constructed simulations, and those simulations are very foundational for like astronauts, for example, or there's a company called MDA that's utilizing the HoloLens 2 to construct the next International Space Station around the moon. So it's widespread in the space industry, but of course also aerospace entails flying flights. So you have things like Microsoft Flight Simulator, which now of course has integration with virtual reality. And of course, automotive industry as well. So you can think of maintenance, things of that nature. Okay, and then we get to scientific research and data visualization, which of course we're at university. This is a big one here. XR facilitates data analysis and visualization in scientific research, and it enables the immersive exploration of complex data sets. And AR, of course, overlays the information, so it's an enhancement, aiding experiments. Yeah, and I would say XR as a whole empowers researchers and gives them new tools to work with. Okay, what are some of the innovations? Where are we going with XR? Some of the current trends are things like advancements in amplifying the immersive experiences. So most of the advancements are tied to immersion. Of course, you have new equipment with higher resolution displays, faster refresh rates, and tracking systems. Standalone VR headsets, as I mentioned, the Quest 2 revolutionized the game, and I think it really liberates users. And there's a sort of a direction where AR glasses are getting smaller and smaller. VR glasses are also getting smaller. Now I think there's something called pancake lenses, which they recently introduced, which shrinks about the size of VR headsets in half, I think. So that's incredible. And of course, eventually you want to get to a lightweight experience where you basically don't even notice you have something on your head. Okay. I'd like for you to indulge me for a second. This is going to get a little conspiracy theory, but if you think about it, we live our life day in, day out. We don't really, besides, philosophical ponderance, we don't really think about it much. We have a routine. There's a method to the madness, if you will. And so in this way, if you assume that we were in a simulation, you could say that we are fully immersed, because there's no seams in the experience that ruin our immersion. Well, there's things, slight irregularities like auditory. So if we started seeing things without rational explanations, or hearing things without rational explanations, or smelling, you could think of all the senses. That would ruin our experience with immersion. Unfortunately, that's sort of where most XR technologies are at today. I think there's a long way to go. There's a lot of limitations in that regard. And so these are the things that we need to work on. With that being said, though, I'd like now to introduce our wonderful expert panelists from eclectic distributions, and hopefully each one of them can provide a unique perspective on the topic at hand today, the importance of immersion in XR. So please, everyone, I'm honored to introduce a warm welcome, Iris van Sint-Maartensdijk, Funda Yildirim, Lucia Rabago-Meyer, and Christian Harmeer. Please. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. It's very exciting. Okay, so first of all, since we're talking about immersion so much, I thought it'd be very nice to go over each one of your thoughts on immersion. Immersion XR, as you know, is foundational. It's one of the pillars of the successful XR experience. And I would say it's important to a large variety of industries, and I'm sure every single one of your applicable fields. And we'd love to know more how each of you value immersion in your applicative setting, and what specific elements of immersion play a significant role in achieving your individual end products or end goals in your practice. And would you say you value certain immersion elements over others? So if you could pass one by one, I'd like to hear each of your...
Do you want to start there?
Okay, let's see if it works. I won't talk too loud, but I think the people behind us have left, so that helps. All right, so what immersion elements I would value over others, right?
Yes.
Yes. So I work with studying criminal behavior and victim behavior. So I study behavior that's usually practically or ethically not really feasible to study outside of the lab. And for me, immersion matters, but I think over the years I've figured out that we don't need the best graphics actually to get people immersed. We need to make sure we have a good story for them to tell. I've done work in prisons in which I exposed burglars to a virtual environment in which they were allowed to burgle. And it was looking quite okay, but looks quite dated now, but still everyone got quite immersed, and the students who had to do the same as well. And I think with the recent study, which you can see today, in which we had students burgle together, we weren't able to have students see a full avatar of another person. And it actually turns out it didn't really matter what the avatar was. So for me, the storytelling is actually very important in immersion, rather even than the graphics being 100%.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so since I have a background in low-level perception, so I'm always thinking of the intrinsic reasons that makes XR immersive. So having said that, so I always compare the XR environment to what we have in a typical cognitive psychology lab, which is basically people looking at the computer, responding to stimuli, which we call psychophysics. And there, compared to XR, you're very open to like outside sensory distractions. And also there is a kind of still this tie with the reality. While in XR, you know, even when we close our eyes, we think like we're kind of detached. We use for meditation. And XR, the precious part is, I think, the fact that people are really feeling alone and they have a high sense of belonging. So we see that so I work with consumer behavior and political psychology. And when we ask people to perform some tasks, we see that they can manipulate their behavior like answers, but they cannot control their physiological responses. So in that case, I think immersion makes it very valuable to get the real responses. They cannot control their actual responses, physiological responses. So that is one thing. And the other one is what I find very important in the experiments is, you know, adding some small details in the environment, because if they get to, you know, do a little bit of looking around, a little bit of interacting with like an object you put there, they kind of feel that they're having their own experience, so they're responding more realistically, which you cannot, again, do with your computer setting environments. So I think those are the important immersive invoking things about XR. Thanks.
Hi, we work with firefighters, military, and policemen. And what we've seen in the past is actually completely connected to what you also say. It's not so much the graphics. Yes, they are important up until a certain point, but I think the storyline is like way, way, way more important. You can make a very dull looking environment very interesting by just having a good briefing or story actually up front. The trouble is that if you want to get people in there for the first time, the first thing that they actually look at is really the graphics part. So the emotional barrier that they sometimes have with like lower level graphics is a bit of a thing. But rationally, in the end, it's not the most important thing. We've also looked a lot at sound, and sound design is really important. I think high-end graphics with no sound is definitely not preferred compared to maybe medium graphics and good sound. Next one that is, I think, a bit more haptic feedback, so that you also can tangibly feel some things or whatever, or get some kind of like feedback on the environment. If you're walking or bumping into things, for instance, that stuff is interesting. And the last thing that we actually found that contributes quite a bit also is smell. So we actually did experiments, for instance, with a police officer that was standing in front of a car, and through in basically the trunk of the car there was a dead body. At least that was the scenario. And police officers could indeed already smell something like that by standing just outside. And that changed their whole perception of approach on what they were going to do. Or I think it's hard to say like which one you prefer above the other one. I think it should just be a good mix. And it depends on your training goal.
Of course. Great.
Hi, most of you know me, I guess. I work for the lab. I'm one of the developers at the lab. So I would say, talking about immersion, I go again with Iris in the sense of the storyline and the context is everything. Although I would add a little bit to what Funda was sharing. I think it's also on the interactions. The fact that you can make more natural or more normal interactions. Actually, I think you were talking about how you detach the person from the reality in a way. And once you are detached of that reality, you want to feel as normal as you can. So what you see is that if you play around with the interactions or behaviors, you can actually enhance the experience. And then some of these other perceived senses, they don't fall back because they are part of the experience for sure. But, well, you could say, talking about constraints of budget and money, it helps a lot that there are specific things that can really help you create those immersive moments, and that the more you create on it, the more the experience gains in a way. As where, for example, with other situations like the lab room, for example, you really need to invest on a lot of them. So you get this like trade-off in that sense of immersion.
Yeah, great. Good. Okay, so now that we know that your base stat of where you think immersion, or how immersion is important to each one of you, I think it'd be nice to talk a little bit about yourselves. So we're going to go one by one. There's an introduction slide for each of you. So perfect, you have the mic. Let's start with you, Lucia.
Yeah, so, well, like the slide says, I'm a lead developer and tech coordinator for the BMS lab. I'm responsible for the XR pipeline on the laboratory. So I basically work with most of the researchers on the faculty, on the social science faculty, to work on their projects and develop their projects. We also work sometimes with companies. I basically kind of help them to transform their ideas or their concepts into a project in a way. And what is beautiful about it, and that's why the quote, the cocky quote on the screen, which says, "I have a passion for building the impossible. As I found it out, it's all about the perspective." And I think that comes with today quite clear already in what we are talking, because what you see is that a lot of the times you have a way that the immersion should be or the experience in VR should be, but if you think about different perspectives or you try to come up with different ways, you actually encounter that you can get to a similar or an imitation of the reality, and I think that can bring you into the immersion point. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself.
All right. Okay, Funda, you're next.
So yeah, basically, as I said, I have a background in visual perception. I was pretty much a visual scientist until I got a bit protest about the dominance of vision over other senses. So afterwards, I started to explore multisensory perception by doing audio-visual interaction. And recently, I've been really into a lot of senses, and especially integrating a lot of senses in VR. And yeah, I think we'll talk more about senses at one point, but there were moments where, you know, the VR experience got exhausted in all the use of all the senses, because usually we don't really use all of them actively. anyway, so I would maybe like to talk about a bit more what I would like to do in the future, because also having a neuroscience background, I really want to see the technology that enables us to use brain recording or neuroimaging real time during XR experiences. Now it is possible, but we are kind of getting lost in the noise we get. So I'm hopeful that technology would get there. And I'm also very eager to start experimenting with real-time environment generation, which is very hard at the moment. Therefore, the last statement, I would like to create virtual reality environments with AI chatbots. Based on individual declaration, I would like to see the environments change, which will make a lot of our jobs easier at the same time. So yeah, it's more about my dreams than what I'm doing in a very limited sense.
Thank you very much. Iris.
Sweet. Yeah, so my background is social psychology and criminology. So I really want to use mostly VR to study behavior. It's practically or ethically quite impossible to otherwise do. So like I said, my first VR experience, or at least my real research VR experience, was to have students burgle a virtual house, which was wonderful because you could already see such a difference in expertise compared to actual burglars, because students would rate the kitchen, for example. There was one student who would rate the kitchen of all the canned soups and the peas, and like, wonderful, my friend, but you don't get a bonus for this. Since then I've been really loving virtual reality a lot, so I use it a lot in my research. And I must say the quote, when collecting data, I always wonder why I use VR. Always I'm thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I not sending out a questionnaire to 1,000 people rather than getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to make sure that my code works before the participants get there. And I think none of my students is here, but they must have seen me and my co-collaborator being crazy coding behind a computer. And yeah, when everything fails or something doesn't go well, or when I was in prison, no one shows up for your prison experiment, and then the computer also malfunctions, you really think, why technology? But yeah, then you get the data in, and then everything is wonderful. I've been analyzing the data from our latest project last week, and then I think it's the rose-colored glasses that maybe you also have when giving birth to a baby, like, this is amazing, I have to do this again. So I may or may not have a little bit too much VR projects lined up, and a summer project to get a little bit more data from participants that Lucy and I have been talking about. How do we make sure we know more about our individual participants, where they walk, what they look at, etc. So yeah, absolutely love and hate VR at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
My name is Chris. I'm a graduate student actually of the university, studied computer science, man-machine interaction, or human media interaction as it's called, I think, nowadays. I think it was nice studies because engineers can make something really technically nice, but utterly unusable also sometimes. And that's why I like to be in this area. I think we started very early with VR. We started already in 2005. At that time, there was only, I think, the Imagine Z800. It was not even on one of your pictures, but like completely not really immersive. That's actually why we started with a couple of laptops in a backpack, combined with a motion tracking system, see what you can do in VR. And the first few years were really focused on giving people an experience. And that was nice. We actually also figured out that we needed to build hardware. So there's actually some of the stuff that you see there. There's actually technology from 2016 on the picture, but some law enforcement people that you see training there. We closed down the biggest VR project on police actually in Europe. That was called ShopPros. We did it together with actually Dutch police, Romanian police, Swedish, I think, and 2 German police forces. Quite nice, learned a lot, and also learned actually that it's not only about the experience. It's actually also very important to give people like a measurable outcome, because in the end you want to know if you're doing training, are you a 5, a 6, a 7, or maybe a 10? Maybe you think you're a 10, but you're actually not. So that's actually one part. And then the second part, what's really interesting for us right now, is like, how can we give the instructor better control over the environment so that they know like how far they can push the student? Because in the end, training is about efficiency. And we don't have enough people, we don't have enough time, you need to get them like to a certain level, but how do you do that as an instructor? How do you build this like digital thermometer? So that's something that we're really interested in, and for us, everything right now is really into the concept of measurably skilled how do you measure that? Make it objective, because we, especially on the cognitive part and on the mental part, it's absolutely not objective right now. It's all subjective.
Good, thank you. All right, so this portion of the segment, we'd like to continue sort of discussions about yourselves. So I'll ask a series of questions for each of you relating to some of what you've already talked about. So Iris, you've already mentioned the burglary project. Of course, we've had the pleasure to work together on that in the past. And of course, exploring the decision-making patterns associated with the burglary and that. You've already touched on this a little bit. Of course, the research used virtual reality. I'm curious, what was it about using these kinds of methodologies with virtual reality, I mean, that made the insights from your data sort of more unique compared to the norms in your field?
Yeah, so when it comes to a lot of criminological research, and especially in burglary research, we have to depend on basically two data sources to get information. One is data from the Ministry of Justice and the police, very valuable information about where burglaries take place, but we don't exactly know why. And then we turn to interviews and surveys with offenders. Well, those of you who are psychologists know that that's also not the holy grail. People tend to not want to give away the secrets of their trade. I mean, if you're a burglar, you don't want to get caught the next time, so right. Why would you say it? You also have people simply forgetting things because our memories are not perfect. And also, as I've experienced, when there is a female interviewer, there might be some over-exaggeration of how good of a burglar they exactly were. So, so we wanted to see with VR, can you make sure that we see their natural behavior they would show in real life? So one of my former promoters was the first to show this with a virtual house and actual house, in which both students and real former burglars burgled both houses, randomized which house they burgled first. And there were significant differences between the students and the burglars, but not between a virtual or a real house. And that is exactly what we wanted to go towards. We wanted to immerse them in environments so we could see a lot of natural behavior. So burglars scout a neighborhood before they actually enter a house. And if you would intuitively ask them, like, hey, if you would scout a neighborhood, what do you do? That's not going to work, because a lot of it is intuition. You can also see that, for example, in the way that burglars burgle a virtual real house. They will first go to the master bedroom. They will avoid children's room, bathrooms, so hide your valuables there. Maybe a little bit in the living room, and then they go out. Students and non-experts just randomly go about. And you see that pattern over and over again. And talking about the police, my father is a police officer, and I exposed him to the virtual house, and he did it exactly the same as a burglar did. So I was a bit suspicious, but it turns out that when you are searching a house to see where a suspect has hidden their valuables, it's the same pattern, basically. Oh. So VR really is essential to make sure we can capture that behavior which you're not able to verbalize well. And I think we've been able to see that very wonderfully in my PhD work, in which we can see how people walk around. Students tend to stand in front of houses like this, like, ooh, is there something in there? Whereas you see burglars really subtly looking at doors and windows, and they're like, oh yeah, and keep on going. So not to be suspicious. So it's really essential, this VR, to make sure that we can capture their unique behavior. We don't want them to necessarily verbalize.
Very insightful. Thank you. And so I would presume then that through this research, this helped you identify potential criminal involvement and long-term prevent crimes? Yeah, definitely. So with my PhD work, we looked specifically at the presence of virtual others. So the idea was always you need people to actually intervene. And we showed that, no, it's already enough for one person to be there. Because one person can already remember you, and one person can also identify you maybe later on if you have been committing a crime. And that was really cool to be able to do, because experiments in criminology are very rare because of the sensitiveness of the topic, and also getting access to the prison population. And one thing we've also been able to show is that WhatsApp neighborhoods signs which say, hey, we're watching you, are not that effective, unfortunately. And we have thus been able to do some manipulations which, with the Dutch police and hopefully now also with the Danish police, will lead to some actual crime prevention measures. And I think that's the most wonderful thing that I could achieve with my research. And do you also touch on exploring lowering recidivism rates, for example?
Well, I'm not sure if I can achieve this. All the burglars that I spoke are always like, yeah, I'm going to quit burglaring. I've done enough. I've got kids. I'm not going to do this again. And you know that's not really going to happen. So burglary rates in the Netherlands have gone down. You're welcome, everyone. I think a lot of the people have gone to cybercrime, which is also something I'm interested in studying with VR. So I'm going to try something else to see if we can reduce recidivism.
Great. Well, thank you for all that you do. We appreciate it. Okay. Christian, I understand that you are the CEO of Rely On.
Yeah.
And one of the original founders.
Yeah, correct.
You've touched on Rely On a little bit, but
Yeah.
could you tell us a little bit about this company, the mission, what it is exactly that you do?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems nowadays that we don't have, what I already mentioned before, we work for law enforcement, fire service, actually, and military. We do that within, on the military side, NATO countries. And one of the biggest issues that we see nowadays is that the environment around us is getting more complex, connected and chaotic, actually. That means that you have to train people to a really quite high level. Because I don't know if you've seen it, a couple months back, there was a big ad in the Telegraaf newspaper on a police officer that shot actually at a young kid in a tractor. I think the kid was 16 or something. And this kind of media publications have a big impact basically on the community. So basically on the law enforcement community, but also at the higher bosses there. So what you see is that actually an effect which happens during the day can certainly have a strategic impact, which is a bit annoying for the organization for the high level, but it's also very annoying actually for the community itself. And that can have side effects that you don't want. What I'm trying to say is that we need to basically prepare people really well because we don't have enough people right now. If you're looking at a lot of police stations or whatever, they're not always fully filled. If you're looking at the training that they get, they supposedly get 32 hours of training per year, like generic police officers. Last year, average was 16, I think, maybe 15 point something-ish hours. And one of the reasons behind it is that they just don't have enough time. So they stay actually at the police station instead of going to the training center because there's not enough training time. But actually 32 hours is already not enough training. So this is really a big problem. And it's getting a bit worse and worse and worse. We see the same thing in fire service actually and the military also. So I think, we have to prepare them better in relevant environments because right now they train mainly in physical, really analog environments. Let's call it a bit like that. And those environments don't have enough variability to give people enough confidence in can I do it also then in that setting, yes or no. So I think that's an important part on the front end. And if you don't train them well, they'll end up with maybe a trauma in the end. Like military right now in the US, 1 in 4 they fall out or drop out of service because of PTSD. That's really a lot. And I mean, if you have enough people, maybe in China or India, that might not be such a problem. But I think we don't have enough people.
Yeah.
So you need to be quite careful about what you're doing. So that for us is really the biggest driver on what we do. But it takes a lot of education because the problem is that the population that we work with is very, very conservative. I mean, if you work with police, they always approach things from the negative. Like, what have you done? A bit like that. And they're also very suspicious to new technology and things like that. They always call training it has to be realistic. And with that, they mean what they do in real life. But in real life, they don't train realistically. Okay. So they still think, in essence, that the Earth is flat, but it's actually round.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's one. And they're quite emotionally attached to all kinds of things. So what you mentioned already, interaction has to be natural. That means that they have to be able to use their weapon, their baton, their pepper spray, whatever. And not a joystick or something.
Right.
Because for them, that's too far.
And I imagine there's incentive for many of these emergency services. I imagine there's some financial savings on their half as opposed to doing a complicated training scenario. They can have it contained within a headset.
Yes and no.
Okay, interesting.
Yes, on one hand, on the more bigger types of trainings. So, for instance, if you want to train the Schiphol airport and you want to train evacuation, simple thing, that's very costly because closing down the airport is expensive. If you're looking at the military and you look at infantry, for instance, you can just go into the forest, right, and train there. So is that more expensive than VR or XR? I think not.
Yeah.
The thing is a bit, training in the forest, is that now so realistic, yes or no? And that's the biggest problem, because they think it's realistic, but it's actually not, because they don't have any opposing force. The opposing force doesn't respond like what they used to do. It's a lot of like, imagine there is, and yeah, and then you need to be able to imagine, because if you can't imagine or whatever, you don't get the right input or the right triggers.
Right.
So it's a bit of yes or no.
Okay. Thank you very much. Punda. So I understand that one of your primary pursuits is essentially to use technology to bring basically an accessible way to acquire new skills, whether that's cognitive, motor skills, social skills. And so how has VR, AR, and or XR impacted this pursuit of yours?
Making more accessible. That is, yeah, yeah. There are a lot of perspectives we can, put on accessibility, of course. So basically, XR is there for immersion and accessibility. If you want to look at, how the VR promotes itself, it's already making like realistic situations come at you. But it is very interesting that we are using VR, extended reality in general, both to make things very realistic and also at the same time escape from reality. So it is a perfect tool to, for escapism, for games, for entertainment. And I think most of the selling point of these tools is to start with entertainment. And then for researchers, it's our interest to, make it less costly and to make it accessible for researchers to study, criminals, police training, for my case nowadays, defense industry, even train operators, etc. So I have that. So I would love to use open access codes and all the environments to release them, but I think automatically VR is quite accessible by its own. So another thing. I actually, to that question, I can't see myself like doing much extra to make things accessible, but I just like using XR because it makes situations accessible. Yeah.
I see. Okay. And I presume certainly with the motor skills aspect, you have experience with human computer interfaces, and so. I'm curious. I want to know, have you faced particular challenges with integrating virtual reality with these human-computer interfaces? And if so, how have you addressed that?
So let me think. Because when we speak of motor interactions, I'm at the moment trying to integrate neurofeedback with motor interactions, which is basically, we can never trust the performance we get out of the experiment when we are like asking people to press buttons to operate a vehicle. What we do is to look at the performance, but we even if they make the vehicle go in the right direction, we're then interested in if they're doing a good teamwork. And so that brings us to speech analysis and also to neural signals. Currently, we're working on if the brain signal synchronization makes better teamwork. So that is more than just human machine interfacing, but I think I'm more on the human. I don't know how to put it anymore. There is interaction between brain computer interaction, but computer being the augmented reality scene. Okay. So this is there are some studies. It's not super pioneering, but to apply it for training purposes for drivers, for operators, it's kind of new because we are now trying to change the kind of augmented reality objects and to make them more usable, more accessible based on the user's brain signals. So that the problems I run in doing that is endless because as I said, except from the noise, it's always hard to evaluate what the brain signal means for performance purposes, but it is a new promising area and it's very exciting to use with XR with neurofeedback.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Lucia. So, of course, We've worked together quite a lot.
Yeah.
We happen to be on the same team.
Yes.
And I've seen you skillfully sort of bridge researchers to a large variety of simulation environments. And I'm curious, in your role as a liaison between researchers and developers, what strategies do you use to refine user stories and product requirements in order to create more immersive XR experiences?
Well, a lot. I think I will answer that one with a little bit of my background, which I hope it can inspire a little bit today or help a little bit. Short story, I did my master's in engineering. And just like you said, at the time in 2012, I was doing black boxes, and I had a lot of complaints. Cool. Yeah. And then I had a professor who said, why don't you start speaking design? Because at the time I studied mechatronics, and at least in Mexico, that meant you were studying computer science, electronics, and mechanics. So you were not an expert, but you kind of knew how to talk to everybody. And then somebody said, why don't you study design? Because you're doing amazing on trying to do things for other people, but you have no clue on how to address needs or hear the user or hear different things. And so I studied interaction design for my master's degree. And then a couple of years later, I was offered the position to do development on this little nice team, which at the time was 4 people. And I had to talk to 5 different professors with 5 different ways of working. Their knowledge is immense. And then they all wanted the same thing, you know, a world where people could go in, get immersed, and so on. And so what I have discovered is that you can go through some of the processes of design by translating them to the researchers, and vice versa. Also by being really transparent and upfront on, look, this is the process. I know you're not going to understand half of it, but if you want to sit down and play with me, because playing it's a thing that we all like to do in a way, we can figure out how to do it best. And so some of the things that everybody has been touching, the fact that we come up with a context, we try to figure out where are the constraints of the hardware or the equipment that we are looking at, and most of the time it's just a translation of different entities or different people and knowledges, and you put them all on the table, and basically what you have to do is just interact on the connections. And so we have different processes. We have done some like one-pages where we can take you from building the idea to all the way on how to do your measurements, because obviously at the lab we are quite interested on or we are trying to give enforcement into saying, hey, pay attention to the measurements, pay attention to the data that you are going to acquire. Because at the start we were focusing on how the world looked and that the participant was immersed, and we were focusing on the participant, but then the project ended and then the researcher was like, okay, and now what did I got? Exactly. Or what you were already saying with the measurements, right? Oh, by the way, did you grade him? Did I have to grade him? You told me that we just had to build this thing, right? So what we found out was actually, or what we have found over the years as a team, is that basically we had to pay attention to things that the stakeholders or the customers that we had around were going to bring us really good ideas, but we had to help them with figuring out the second part of what they were needing and kind of anticipating some things. And anticipating doesn't mean that we solve them, because that would be arrogant from my side to say it like that. No. But it's just we can think along with them. And that must be something that you all experience at some point on your own fields. So I always say that at the lab we have the chance to actually just be translators between researchers and technology. Yeah, exactly. And it has been a quite privileged position and quite fun to do so.
Yeah, well, bridging the social sciences and complex technology, I imagine, has a lot of challenges. But do you think maybe that's the biggest challenge you face in integrating these two, or are there other things that?
Well, for sure, the technology has its own limitations, and you encounter different projects, and well, like everywhere, you have issues of time constrained budgets.
Right.
So you have a series of list of situations and problems which are more natural to every single type of project. I would say communication is one of them, because when you're working on VR, you're really required to have different disciplines around you. And most of us in our own disciplines can be quite, again, sorry to say it like this, but arrogant into thinking that I am the expert. So I, as a developer, want to tell you, researcher, that you're thinking wrong, because how comes that you're coming up with this idea? Because it's not going to work. And it's not precisely that way. It's actually the fact that you can communicate and you can introduce these multidisciplinary teams. And that's actually something that I quite like of the way the pipeline of the lab has been organized, where as you guys, some of you know, and for those that don't, we actually put interns together with social science students to do, for example, their master thesis. And what we guide and what we help them, it's to translate from one language to the other one, basically, in a really broad sense of it. And so I think that's the major challenge, because like I said from the first slide, you can do everything. And well, you guys have been an example of it. I think 10 years, and you can see the change of technology and the advances on all of it. So you can do progress however you want. The point is to have a great team that knows how to communicate and that can do that change of perspectives and trade-offs to little by little grow on the project. And so that, for me, it's the key part.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Well, on that note, we are going to take a short intermission, about 15 minutes or so. So please, if you want snacks, drinks, washroom breaks.
Working basically like language. It's like fun. It's a mess, but it's fun.
Well, also students who are like, yeah, I want to do this, that. It's like, have you talked to the lab?
Yeah.
I just have to tell them, like, no, we're not going to do it. I want to have a guardian interact. I'm like, no.
We're not.
Oh my goodness.
Iris, I'm so sorry. I butchered your name.
Oh yeah.
I practiced.
Test, test, test.
All right, folks. Whenever you're ready, we'd like to get back to the event.
My account because it's your account there. And there's a pin. It requires a pin.
Oh, how long?
Yeah.
6760.
676.
Ladies and gentlemen, okay, thanks. Yes. Folks, we'd like to resume the event, please, so whenever you're ready.
Maybe it's not exactly what. Exactly. So you need to have somebody in between who translates.
Ready?
Yes.
All right.
Let's.
Shall we go?
Yes.
So Canadian.
Yes, Toronto.
Oh, man.
Yeah. That's far away, huh?
From where? In Canada.
Near Toronto.
Oh, Toronto. Oh, Toronto.
Yeah.
I'm more a Toronto fan than a Montreal.
Really? Okay.
I think Toronto is a bit more Asian than Montreal.
Edgy. Interesting.
I did a road trip once, like from Buffalo, actually from Boston by car to Buffalo towards Montreal, Toronto, and whatever, and then back again.
Oh, that's
The road accent, that was nice.
probably a nice view. The road trip. Yeah.
It was like Indian summer, so it's really
Oh, nice. Good stuff.
How did you end up here?
Actually, it was the only listing on my school portal. It was through co-op in Europe. So I was, sounds like an adventure, you know. And then I read the mission statement of the BLS Lab. It's very like diverse with XR experiences, and of course, I love XR, so it was for me. So and now here I am. But
You did a good intro.
thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You could have presented.
Thanks.
Curious to stuff. It's a nice crowd. Friendly people.
Yeah. All right, folks.
So most likely I'll be off from.
That's your 4 week.
No, I'm off from October to October. So I want to make sure that we leave you with the next batch.
Yeah, I'll make sure to.
I know it's not the most common way of like saying it or whatever, but just like I've been trying to inform at least some people that I know I have projects this year. Yes. So everybody is like,
I just heard that you have a great affinity for space, right?
Yes, I do.
We got funding for space criminology.
Yeah. Really? What would that entail? Space criminology?
Immersing people into space. So we want to. So no, we need to make a meeting with you. So like, I'm great, you like space. So let's go.
Yeah, that sounds great actually. It's fascinating. Yeah, I think they'll just realize, I've said it many times, but I don't want to be overbearing, you know.
Clearing your throat in annoying ways everywhere. Can I get you some water?
I'm okay, thank you. I had a couple glasses.
Intact just keeps on disappearing on.
Oh, that's not sticky? That's not good. Ah, okay.
So just be very anonymous.
All right. We all know who you are. You're a superstar. Okay, I'll go one more time. Just a reminder for those of you who aren't already logged into WooClap, it'd be nice if you could do that. Of course, if you'd like to participate in some of the questions, our next segment is full of them. All right. 20. Okay. That's good. Yes, sure.
Do you actually take the train? Oh, that's fantastic.
All right. Continuing on with the panel discussion, this next segment, I thought it'd be nice if we be slightly more engaging and maybe involve some of you with some of the discussions. So we have various WooClap questions, so please feel free to pitch in as well. As you know, there is a think tank today, and there are several topics available for the think tank. And so in this segment, we'll be covering questions related to those topics. So we'll start with the first topic, which is 5 senses in XR. So what I'll do is I'll ask various questions, and then once again, I'd love to hear unique perspectives from each of you. Okay. First of all, which senses do you believe are more critical to achieving this immersion factor? And do you see a gap in certain immersion technology for certain senses? Is that for a reason, you think? Perhaps too difficult to implement certain senses or not worthwhile to implement certain senses?
Is it to us all, or is it to a particular person?
It's one by one. I'd love to hear each of your perspectives. So.
I'll grab it. Here we go. I'm getting old. Senses. Geez, that's a good one. Well, we actually already just talked a bit, I think, about the different stimuli that we had, like visual, haptic, sense, or like whatever. I don't know. It completely depends on your goals that you want to achieve in the end. And if you're doing, for instance, technical training, maybe motor skills are more important, so haptic feedback might be very important. But if you're looking at, for instance, more cognitive type of training, maybe it's just less important and you can get away with a couple of shortcuts. So it's, as a good engineer, I would always say it depends.
Right.
It's a hard one. Okay, I will just put 3 ideas that come to my mind. The first one thinking that obviously the visual one is the one that we depend the most because that's what the technology is on. So I would say that has a highlight, although it was already kind of expressed that, well, you have different levels in which you can kind of operate in a way and then you can play with it. I would say sound is one of those ones that is kind of dismissed a lot. And it can be quite empowering to the immersion. So you can go with a balancing act, right? You could go with less quality of image, but better sound or better quality or tricks on the sound part, and then enhance the immersion. I think one that it's not really well explored, and sadly due to the products that are currently out there, we have not really gone into, is the smell. Or the taste, the effects of taste and smell. I find this one quite hard in a way, because actually if you're thinking on the experience of smelling and tasting in the real world, it's actually not that on-off trigger. And so in these experiences, it can be quite hard because most of the time we're searching for on-off triggers in certain interactions, because also you have a limited amount of time that the person is within the environment. So you were talking about training. I can imagine a person goes and has to go to the forest the whole day, but if I'm going to put them in VR, he's not going to be more than 30 minutes. So I think that these are 2 that are on their played, but these are two places where you can play a lot around, and there's a lot of opportunity to grow. I think that's what I have for in terms of senses.
Okay, so yeah, I would like to say a lot about like chemosensory perception. That's like my pet topic. I don't know, but I'd like to start with the biggest problem that we are all having, and I think senses can be a good solution to that, which is like all of us losing our 25% of the subjects due to fatigue, nausea, whatever. So I know there are applications applied by some companies, which is basically if you kind of cut down on some visual cues, then the motion sickness can be reduced, and similarly, some relaxing odorants can also ease the mental overload. So I think senses should be explored in the sense that first of all we need to have more people feeling comfortable in the VR environments. So, and also like this is for VR, but AR is automatically half reality, half immersion. So it's I think AR can be picked just for the sole reason of having more comfort in that sense. But anyway, so coming to senses, I think my prediction is that the future application of senses will be very useful for kind of compensating for the lack of some senses. This could be, for people who have loss of visual abilities, hearing abilities, but also to enhance the environment a little. So yeah, in my previous research, I do a lot of cross-sensory perception, which is, how senses translate to others. This has this famous example of Kiki Boba, but between senses, I studied how like harmonic sounds refer to rough more smooth surfaces, or like how colors translate into taste. This is like a very fancy topic that I like. But also for like blind people, most of the applications use hearing to compensate for vision. But actually, if you ask the researchers of visual impairments, they would say the haptic sense is actually the correspondence of seeing. So that can be very well studied using the AR, the mixed reality environments, because you can do simply so much. I mean, in this one experiment, we basically, we exhaust them. They're only there for 5 minutes, but we put them in, I think, 50 different restaurant environments. They, like every time they opened their eyes, they were in a different smelling environment, or different colors, or different menu fonts. Like we changed everything we could. And okay, that brings me to the chemosenses, which is like everyone's to-go topic. Like it would be great to have it, but as Lucy said, so you cannot just alter the odorants in the room. I mean, it's technologically hard to suck up the smell, but also it's not naturalistic, not something we have. But I just want to share this funny anecdote, because I've been visiting these, arts installations which uses 5 senses and VR. And so I've been in instances where we did taste some things, but when you try to, also odorants, when you try to use these for like entertainment purposes, first of all, we usually, taste something for the sake of survival. Like we just eat, and it's this different instinct than vision, because vision, we go to the movies, we play computer games. It's a sense that we use more for entertainment. But when it comes to taste, even when you don't see what you're eating, I mean, I had a lot of friends who just, took off the VR headset, went to throw up after the art installation. So there I thought, okay, maybe if you're going to do that, better use AR so people actually see it. And they get immediately alerted when they like kind of hear a smell, that you want to know the source, because these are like emergent kind of senses that you want to act upon. So using these for like creating memories, for entertainment purposes, for immersive environments, we really have to be careful, and maybe only either use, I think at the moment we can use them for studying negative emotions, or like really like, I don't know, meditative environments, but we have to be careful there. So I'll cut it short there.
Can I
sure.
ask you a question? Sorry, can I ask her a
Yeah, of
question?
course. Yeah, go ahead.
So basically from the anecdote that you're sharing, what you mean is you actually with the different scent, so you have this visual, right? I'm on VR, and then in VR I will see, for example, let's say an apple, and I actually give you a banana. So the moment I approach the object to my hand, as it's not corresponding on my hand, the object in terms of smell and taste, with the object I'm watching, your brain completely disconnects from the engagement of the environment, basically. So you can create this association of senses if they are not mixed. Basically, that's what you. Am I interpreted it properly?
No, like that's depending on the pair of stimulus you give them. Sometimes if like there is this feeling paradigm in vision, if they're close enough, you kind of fill in the gap. Well, this is just like a banana that grew like an apple on the tree. Well, if you can say that, that depends on the similarity of the stimuli. But most of the time, if you cannot connect them, it's like the fear you're having in a VR. I don't know. Rock, like you're gonna fall down. So you completely, I don't know what happens in the brain, I would like to know, but you completely like have no idea. I don't know what happens at that point. Yeah. So, but if you want to study like cross-sensory perception, then you want to like make them, the different senses approach to other a little.
Yeah, I think it's a very important topic that you touch upon, which is, cyber sickness. I think as researchers, we're a bit of the hungry caterpillar. We want to know everything and about every participant at the same time. But also, I literally have a dedicated section of my PhD thesis in which I apologize profusely to all the colleagues who I made throw up or very nauseous in my PhD, because cyber sickness really is a thing. And if you would implement more of these senses, the risk of cyber sickness increases quite a lot. And we've noticed with our co-offending project now is we had to deal with 2 people potentially being cyber sick at the same time. So that's why we also decided to, for certain constraints, to make sure we would reduce cyber sickness. But like, ooh, damn, we really have to take that well into account, because it's easier to continue or stop a research data collection with 1 person than with 2 people, because you want to get all the data that you possibly can get. So yeah, I'm always a bit hesitant about implementing all of these senses. Of course, I would really love to. It's also really been shown in research that in VR we pay much more attention to detail than we would in daily life. So there's research about what, for example, train stations look like and how scary they are to potential people who walk there at night. And in VR we notice a lot of things that we wouldn't normally in daily life, as we would go around walking in this train station. So we have to realize that all of these senses will have such an impact on how our participants or the recipients of these VR environments experience them, both in a very good and in a very bad way. Yeah. Although I must say I would really love the haptic feedback, because if you try to burgle a house, you can't take the couch with you or other items. And a lot of people try to take all of the items, so you want to make sure they're at least slowed down by the weight of the stuff that they take, for example.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because earlier, I think all of you echoed this. You were sort of saying how, visually speaking, it's only up to a certain point, excuse me for a second, where it matters. But I wonder if part of the innovation with exploring the 5 senses in XR is more about a redistribution of what senses we focus on, as opposed to trying to get every single sense to 100%, right? Because if we're already at a point with, visually speaking, where it's immersive enough, then perhaps it's more productive to explore, say, smell or one of these other senses. And I mean, you can see that the polls are in. I think the audience also agrees that sight is very well represented, so that's not an issue. Okay, moving on. Our next topic is creating engaging XR experiences. And this also ties into the things you guys were saying earlier about, for example, visually, how that's only important up to a certain point, and how storytelling plays a role. That's actually one of my questions, is thinking back to sort of these 5 senses, what are some of the interesting ways we can integrate either like audio cues or storytelling to sort of get around some of the limitations that you experience with some of these senses to increase engagement and immersion in XR?
So how I would put in the senses to make sure we increase engagement? I think, at least for the scenarios that I'm testing, sounds are quite important to add to the engagement of the visual cues. So I think for some of you'll be able to see the co-offending one. There is a virtual avatar which doesn't look like a person. It's basically, someone has described it very unlovingly as the blob. And that actually didn't make much difference to participants. Somehow everyone always starts waving at each other when you start to co-offend. I think we've all done it when we were doing that, like, hey, I see a virtual other. It's very funny, it's very natural behavior. I love it very much. And I think that's, we've kind of reached the point where we don't need the visual as much to tell the story, because even with limited burglary environments, we can create the same. But I think, to integrate the sound would then make it very realistic, because with sound you can hear if someone is coming home and potentially catch you.
Right.
I think that, let's see, was there, how could industry contribute to creating immersive XR? I think, the interactivity is very important. We had very limited items that people could grab. They loved it all, but they would love to grab a lot more. So the interactivity, there's so much that you can do. But also, and we've seen the kind of like hamster wheel, or like people can walk around in VR. I think that's going to create an even more immersive story for people, because they will be able to grab things much more as I am holding this microphone right now.
Yeah. Well, immediately what comes to mind is I think there's certain, for example, gaming experiences where they acknowledge the limited factors, and that's sort of integrated into the experience. So you can think of a scenario where you're not able to feel something, to physically touch something and have that sensation. And then the story then explains that it's because of a particular reason. So it's interesting how we can sort of avoid the limitations of not having access to all the senses through unique storytelling and things like audio cues. Yeah, okay. Sure, of course.
I think we were talking about that over the break. I think something really important is that to balance this three, or to balance the senses, and in all of these things that we are actually talking, one of the most important thing is, what is the objective of your project? Because most of the time we are thinking about maximizing what research says that we are looking into, right? Oh, I need to go for less motion sickness because that's the problem of my project. Yeah, but what is causing that motion sickness? I want to maximize the senses because I want them all in. Yeah, but what objective? Was there really a need for you to smell the dead body? Yeah. And then the policeman will say, well, yeah. But the whole point of this is, at the end, it's about an objective. And my favorite example of this is, I don't know, I think 3 years ago when the Oculus, one of the first Oculus Quest came out, they brought in the fact that you could use your hands to play with it. And I remember the first intern I had, well, the first intern I had to supervise, we were playing with the Quest, and then we found out that there was a new Spider-Man game. Now, if you think about it, if you want to play like Spider-Man, I want to play and be a Spider-Man, right? And what is the key thing that a Spider-Man does is this gesture with the hand that comes out with the threat, right? And you could play this game in 2 modes. So if you were using the old headset, you had to use the joysticks. And just with the simple thing that with the hands, you could actually point, and they were requesting you to actually use like a certain, at least a certain movement of your hand to be pointed downwards. You could play the game. That shifted completely the whole game. The storyline, everything. I mean, it was just one silly multiplayer game, an adventure game, nothing new. The game is not really inspiring in that sense. The storyline is like just any Spider-Man game that you will find in a Game Boy, in a Switch, in a PlayStation. But the fact that now I could actually take the action and be a Spider-Man. And so that comes with an objective. And the objective is the person has to be someone. And then you have to figure out, well, what was it? Was it the storytelling? Was it the interactivity? which one played the biggest part on that objective. And I think that that's one of the key things for these topics.
Yeah.
I would like to contribute the last part actually to it, because you focus indeed a lot on the experience side of things, but I think in the end part of the experience is also like, at least for the training purposes, like the outcome of it. And that's really like something that's so underwhelmed right now. Like most of the people are really so focused on really the experience during, but not the experience after. And for entertainment, I think that's okay. But for training, I think we're past that. And the big advantage of like XR is that we can passively measure so many things. And especially the passively part. I mean, the downside of XR is that, especially VR, you have to wear stuff, which is not really natural. But the big benefit of that is that you wear stuff so that we can measure passively all kinds of things. So for me, this outcome and how to objectify that, and then from a cognitive point, but also from a mental point, that's really going to be the breakthrough. Because in the end, that's like where our customers are waiting for. I mean, our customers sometimes look at like financial things or whatever, but I think in the end it's way more important to really know, like, hey, you know, am I now really like an 8 or a 9 or whatever? Because I want to know that. Or maybe my buddy next to me wants to know that because his or her life depends on me.
Yeah.
So that's also something that I'm a bit missing in the experience side of XR here.
Okay. Okay. All right, moving on. Our next topic is building communities in XR, which I'm interested to see how that applies differently to each of you. Firstly, I guess Iris, Funda, Lucia, there's a particular focus in academic institutions and research organizations on fostering collaboration. I presume also with training, but maybe slightly less so. But I'm interested in what role do you think that these academic institutions and research organizations truly play into increasing collaboration and innovation with XR?
I think that's quite a difficult question, because not every academic institution will really get what is necessary for doing this type of XR research. I think that Lucy can tell much more about this, that then people are like, oh, I want to have this, but what were your outcome measures? What are your objectives? I think we once had a introduction to how to use VR, etc. And then there was the example of virtual supermarket. Okay, we want to look at the impact of music on what you buy. And then people are like, but you need to look at this and that. And that's like, well, what's your research question? You want to really look into the music. You didn't want to look at the layout of the supermarket. Yeah. And so I think that if I look at individual academics, not everyone is as mindful or has the time to be mindful about what really is necessary to make good XR environments. That being said, of course, academic institutions, we have a lot of freedom into pursuing new types of ideas and new developments. So I think that, academic institutions really are important for XR development, but also there's really constraints to what they can do.
Okay. Anyone else?
I can, again, contribute something from a training perspective on this. I think we're not there yet. I think if on the entertainment side, it's a lot easier because basically people do multiplayer games already for quite some time. Really like way back when games were really simple. But right now, if you're looking at training, so for us an eye-opener was like the whole COVID period, and especially for our customers, because normally they would always train in teams. But at that time or whatever, they were not able to train in teams anymore because of like the whole COVID situation. But what do you then do? Because you still need to train, because if you don't train, you lose basically your skills. So this was a bit like a catch-22. And the big eye-opener there was like, hey, wait, but we can actually use maybe XR to distributively, like on different like physical spaces, train together and do things like that. So it's starting out. And it's starting out also from different points, of course, like cost saver, but mainly as a time saver. Because the scarcest asset that we all have, I think, is time. And why would you spend time driving from A to B and back from B to A again if you can do things actually remotely? So remote instruction, remote coaching, guidance, remote multiplay, basically for teams to work together. We see it actually also not only in training, but we also see it in the execution phase of some of our customers, what they do. So give you a bit of an idea. For instance, sometimes when military wants to do something, so a lot of guys, they want to go to a specific spot, they need a taxi. Taxi can be in this case like a vehicle or a helicopter, a plane or whatever. So these guys then are normally like co-located on the same airfield, but an airfield is big. It's around 3 kilometers wide. So what do they now do? They drive to each other. But they do things in a time-sensitive environment because they need to go out maybe like in an hour or whatever, and not like in 3 hours or in a day. So wouldn't it be better actually to use XR to stay at your own physical location, but start planning together, working together already in this like virtual space? So there we also see this kind of stuff. So every time it depends a bit on what's the goal. So in this case, for planning, it's more like time. For training, it's more like, hey, efficiency, also maybe a bit on time. Sometimes it's the entertainment factor. So I think there's a lot of big benefits to it. I'm really curious why 5 people say it can be a limiting factor.
Well, actually, I have a question related to that. I mean, would you like to chip in, or?
Yeah, but if you want.
Well, it's the next topic, so please go ahead first.
So yeah, the very short answer. I think AR is a great community building tool, but as you said, the technology is still it's in crawling stage. There are a lot of experimental tools and environments, softwares going around. So I think at one point things will be more standardized, so we can build community. Because for a regular person, it's hard to keep track of all the emerging trends, frameworks, whatever. But I want to take, the researcher perspective because, as researchers, especially in cognition research, we've been obsessed with standardized data sets, standardized surveys and batteries and questionnaires. And now there is this, amazing tool. So for us to be in the same environment, pixel to pixel, why aren't we use like extensively the same classroom to build experiments, the same forest? I think it has to do with this lack of standardization. But I think there will come a point where we'll have, 100 cultures doing the same test in the very same environment, maybe like making small changes with, of course, that needs the support of open science and sharing all the making accessible all the materials, but yeah, we are on the way there, so I'm hopeful.
I kind of agree with you guys, but the past year having to go post-COVID, it has been also interesting and eye-opening, because it is true that the technology can help to build communities, and now we can outreach people from different sides, and we can also talk about this building communities on development and research, and then you talk about the multidisciplinarity that you need, and all these beautiful, like I think Iris, you use that like phrase, we have this pink glasses and color eyes, and it's amazing, right? Yes. But I see a couple of things where it's getting a little bit interesting and the antagonist of the whole storyline. The technology still needs quite some requirements and budget on your pocket. And that's something that I would like to say, let's be honest, we are lucky that this faculty is investing so much on the technology to have spaces and resources for the professors to actually play with it. You were already proposing that. Not every university, in this case, I would like to disclaim this one, no, but Iris is working with a PhD candidate in the UK, and actually they are working with us, and when we ask it, do you have enough support from your faculty, she said, well, I have to sort of figure out what to do. So, like Funda is bringing into the table, well, it's not standardized. So you still need, regardless of the fact of the 400 euros, which is comparable to a PC, a headset still is seen as a high-end product and not something that everybody will be addressing, which comes to the next question. Generation-wise and age-wise and opportunities and what people can actually have. If you see the grandma that puts the headset, and there are these videos on TikTok and YouTube and so on, where you see the grandma joining, or a kid of a two-year-old, I think is the one I saw this week, where he sees the dinosaurs inside and starts screaming out of fear. Well, yeah, you can build communities, and yes, they bring you closer together, but we are also talking about the fact that not everyone is capable of dealing with it. And I think that shows how much in pampers we are, in a way, as a technology. The other one is the consequences that it has. So for some of you that are here, I give one of the classes in communication science, and there is this class where we work with 40 students, communications. They are not developers or anything, and we give this class where we, well, I would say, for the sake of how they put it, force them to use Unity. And we make them configure, and the whole concept of the class is actually training them on how to build requirements and to give them that first experience of the multidisciplinarity that an innovation project requires, okay? Yet still the biggest problem that I have is that because of COVID, they don't want to work on the lab spaces. And so now you have this group of students who are, let me call them Generation Z this year, basically, who are used to work from home, who I can barely teach them anything because teaching by the computer or and I see it. I tried this year to give as much as I could the lecture online so that I would be propense to help them on the distance. And this was not even the headset. It was just Teams and, you know, Google Hangout, which you would expect that it's working. And yet still, half of the knowledge went down the drain because you're not in the same rooms, sitting down with them, asking them to do it themselves. So I want to say that although I agree with the benefits of what it brings, it's also bringing a lot of challenges and a lot of research, also opportunities of research, to understand what will be the consequences of the social sciences or the social behavior for society. Because being at home with the headset brings a whole new different level. And don't get me wrong, I live too far away from my family. They are in Mexico, so this kind of technologies and being able to hold probably my mom in virtual reality will be a dream of mine in a couple of years, you know, when I can afford to buy headsets for my whole family. But will it feel the same and will it deliver the same thing? I am sorry, I still don't think so.
But I love that you're touching on the negatives of that because my colleagues and I often reflect about this. Do we even, I mean, sure, okay, sure. People far away, you know, we're bringing them together virtually and that's collaborative and that's great. But profoundly speaking, do we truly want more collaboration if the method of collaboration is just another screen in our face? I mean, surely there's some level of isolation that having another device, you know, it creates a certain sense of separation or isolation, right? So do we even want to encourage building communities in XR? Is what I wonder, yeah.
Can I contribute something to that? I think in the end, basically, like in VR, what you already mentioned, we're still in Pampers. If you look at the devices, like how obstructive they are and how difficult the interaction is with stuff, we're just starting out with like seamless, like finger tracking and whatever. I think in the end, we've all seen, I think, maybe The Matrix or whatever. I think that's basically what it's supposed to be. We're not there yet. But until we're there, I think everything is still a bit of an obstruction. And you need to be able to cope with that or not. And the people that can't cope with that, those you exclude. So that's absolutely something that you need to be mindful of. There's also other stuff that we've seen in our 3-year research project that was a bit on stress measurement. And that was more about like personal safety. So we have a group, or we work with groups that are kind of like a lot of like alpha males in there. Let's put it mildly like that. So what happens is we can basically record everything we do in an after action review. After they do a training lasts maybe like 5, 10, 20 minutes. They do a quick after action review. So they do a replay on what happens. You can see everything like voice communications, whatever, what they did, you name it. It's all in there. What happens then sometimes is if the instructor doesn't pay enough attention, the group becomes a bit unsafe and they start to like ramble about each other or kid about each other or whatever. That was up until here, that was okay-ish. Once we started to do things like a stress level assessment, then it became actually worse because what then actually started to happen was like, you were continually red. A bit like that, and it became a bit more harassment. So what you see with those kind of metrics, that's interesting, absolutely really relevant, but then more for the individual and not for the group. So also these things you need to be mindful of. And a third thing that's interesting is what we're trying to do every time in the type of training that we do is we try to work towards a kind of like stress resilience or kind of like inoculate them against like stress so that they can still perform under high levels of stress. And how do you do that? We try to bring them to that level, to a certain point, which is still hard because it's not objective. But we try to bring them towards a point or whatever where they can safely operate, feel confident and whatever. The question is there also a point where you go too far? and you end up actually with people with a trauma instead of like that you prevent them with that. Yeah, it really is. There is. We have a really small niche user group, which is really like a difficult user group, because that user group is being trained actually to kill other people. This sounds a bit harsh, but there's people in our society basically that are doing nasty things. Well, you've seen burglars or whatever, but there's even more nastier people. And there's other people being trained to do that. I think 2% of the human population is by default able to shoot other people, but because they're psychopaths. The other people, especially the people that you have in government service or whatever, need to be able to cope with those people and fix that. It's not a normal job. So how do you basically do that kind of job and in the evening still be able to sit at the table with your wife, your family, your children, and whatever? It's really, really hard. So again, there also, you need to bring people to this certain stadium or whatever where they accept something that's completely abnormal as being normal. And that's hard. And that's also where like VR comes in. So these are really more of the edgy cases or whatever, but it can be dangerous because if you go too far, and what is too far? Maybe you go to the flip side.
Yeah.
So what we're also slowly seeing is a bit of a shift from, especially VR as the method of study, to becoming the object of which we're studying. So you may have heard of the metaverse. It's not very much popular right now, but the Interpol is very careful with the metaverse. And I'm studying this as well. How are crimes going to be committed within virtual environments? So we are going to have very elaborate cybercrimes that can take place within virtual environments. It might be that in a virtual environment, I can harm someone physically in a physical environment. And one thing which is also quite concerning is that terrorist attacks could be practiced in VR. So let's say we want to shoot up this entire building. Well, we could see what the building looks like, where are the exits, where are the entrances, etc. And I can do it in a very non-suspicious way because I'm not physically there. But you can still get the very same experience. How long does it take me, for example, to come from my office to here? So yeah, VR and XR, we really have to also be very mindful of what it is we could do with it exactly. It's not all the holy grail, and I think that some research are like, yeah, we have to use VR. It has become a big of a buzzword. I think, yeah, AI is slowly replacing that right now, thank God. But it used to be like, oh, we study something, we're going to use VR. It's like, yeah, but why?
Right.
Yeah, so we have to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah.
Just to say that you gave me a new research idea. If we can throw people into like crime boxes, have them commit their crime and then come clean out to the real life.
Sounds very much fun.
All right. We are a little bit over schedule. It's lunchtime. But really quickly, I want to touch on the final topic for the think tank, which is measuring the impact of XR. So we'll do like a little quick round. I'm wondering sort of the metrics that each of you uses in your practice and how they might differ. I imagine there's a large variety of data you can collect and a large variety of selection of metrics. So I'd be interested to hear each one of your common metrics.
Yeah. I always say you have to plan for plan B, C, D, and E when you're working with virtual reality. So I use surveys, sensors, interviews, logging, anything I basically can do. So we use screen recorders to see what's going on. I may or may not have had a little mental breakdown when my logging wasn't working, and we figured that out halfway. And then my colleagues like, oh, that's okay. We still have the screen recorders. So I think better a little bit too much indicators than too little. So of course, objective things like logging, eye tracking, etc., is always good. But you have to make sure that you use as much as you possibly can.
Great.
Yeah, I actually kind of had to, come up to end up using all of them. But I think the important thing is to be less, the least, what's the word? So you have to do it in the least invasive way as possible, because like we ended up in the last experiment, me working with political psychologists, they wanted to give the subjects 100 pages of surveys. So the surveys take like half an hour and the VR experiment takes 4 minutes. So that, I don't think that's the point. So like sensors, any way to automate like these, skip these questions and kind of track them. Such technologies is what we need to be doing and what we need, I think.
I think it's been answered already. First, it's the way of passively sensing actually. So sensors first is really the best way to do things.
Well, I'm not in charge of the metrics, so that's a little bit hard. But I think the only message that I can send, and that's more related to the think tank on the afternoon, it's basically try to be creative. Try to transform the surveys into some object or gadget or activity that you can turn on the screen. And I have seen quite some projects, and I hope we have a chance, if you are interested, to hear how really we have professors in the faculty working on transforming what they consider traditional methods or traditional ways of collecting data and transform them into the best version that we can come up in virtual reality. And that makes it also more quantitative, which helps for some research. And it helps also that we innovate on how we are actually obtaining data, because I see that developers have a passive way of taking sensors, but then the researcher doesn't understand the sensors in itself. So what did I actually measure? What is the information that I'm getting? And then you have the other side where it's like, well, I need to measure this in the classical way because I need to provide information that is feasible or reliable to a certain method. But you can actually do a lot on that area. And I would say it's an underestimated and an under-researched area. Like Iris was saying, there's a lot of research on immersion, on the technology, on the methodology in itself, but not on the data. And I would say that's a really open canvas.
Great. Thank you so much. Just bear with us one moment. My colleague Lina Barashita would like to talk a little bit about the think tank, and then we can all go eat and enjoy ourselves. So just one moment, please. Yes, thank you. The mic.
Okay, so just a few moments of your attention. Yes, indeed. Good point. No. Okay, so I just wanted to get a few moments of your attention. So we had very nice panel with a very nice discussion, and hopefully that could inspire you a little bit. And after the lunch break, we will have a think tank. And now I wanted to encourage you to sign up for the think tank because, wrong side. Yeah, because we will be covering all the 4 topics that also our panelists discussed. And I want to encourage you to make, during lunch, to meet new people and make teams of 3 to 5 people. Sign-up sheets are already there on the table. And you can choose one of the 4 topics provided. And during lunchtime, I will put the topic names on here so you can look at them and choose which one you want to do. And the shorter names you can write on the table. So you would say which team chooses which topic. Okay, so thank you very much. And again, thank you all the panelists. Thank you, Adrian, for leading the discussion.
Wait,